Today, I am revealing the top 10 secret abandoned places in Utah. There are hundreds if not thousands of abandoned places in Utah, so make sure you like if you want to see a part 2. Today the list is going to start off easy, and the spots are going to get cooler and cooler as the list goes on, so make sure you stay until the end. With that being said, the first spot on our list is the ghost town of Lund, Utah. Lund is a village located in Iron County, about 35 miles northwest of Cedar City. The town, established in the early 20th century, was a station stop on the Los Angeles and Salt Lake Railroad, and was a community center for early 20th century homesteaders. The area's population was never large, and most early settlers were unsuccessful due to the region's harsh climate. Settlement activity in the Lund area began with the completion of the railway line through the valley in the winter of 1898, but Lund's population remained extremely small until 1911, when the valley was opened to homestead settlement. The Lund town site was plotted in 1913. The town was named for Robert C. Lund, who was a Utah state legislator, local mine owner, and a director of the Union Pacific Railroad. A population decline began in the 1920s. However, Lund's most traumatic event was in February 1922, when a flood struck the desert valley and partially inundated the town. Lund gained importance as a railroad junction in 1923, when the Union Pacific constructed a branch line from Lund to Cedar City. The branch was constructed in part to encourage travel to southern Utah's national parks, and carried passenger trains during the summer months until 1960. As part of this construction program, the railroad erected what was the historic town's most prominent building, a stately depot. The last passenger train stopped in Lund in 1969, and the depot building was razed the following year, marking the end of the town's railway prominence. A post office operated at Lund from 1901 to 1967. Its closure reflected years of the gradual population decline in the area. Sheep tunnels in Cedar City. Sheep tunnels were constructed to herd sheep under the highway and freeway. Sheep herders would take their sheep to either entrance and take them through the long concrete tunnels. The tunnels have intermittent holes in the ceiling with metal grates to allow light. Today, the tunnels are no longer used for the intentions they were designed for. The tunnels are now a dare and graffiti haven for anyone who dares to enter. Silver King Mine in Park City. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Silver King Coalition Mine in Park City, Utah, was both the largest producer of ore and ore concentrates in the region. One major problem encountered by Silver King was the transportation of its rich ore and concentrates to the tracks of the Rio Grande Railway and the Union Pacific Railroad in Park City. The solution to this problem was an aerial wire rope tramway connecting the workings of the mine and mill with an ore loading station on the Park City railhead. A good example of contemporary engineering in its day, the Silver King tramway is now dismantled and the ore loading station has been abandoned. Thompson Springs Ghost Town. The tiny town of Thompson Springs was founded in the 1880s. It's named for E.W. Thompson, who owned the sawmill in the area. The town got its start as a stopping point for the Denver and Rio Grande trains that ran through as early as 1883. A passenger stop was added in 1883, which brought a bit of prosperity to the town. While Thompson Springs never had very many residents, it was a central point for ranchers to bring their sheep and cattle for shipping. At one point, the town offered a general store, saloon, hotel, and motel, and then a post office was built in 1890. After coal was discovered nearby, the town became a bit larger, and soon included a school and restaurant. This led to quite the population increase. But in the 1950s, several factors contributed to the town's demise. In 1955, the railroad began using diesel engines, which didn't require water stops. In 1957, the Interstate 70 was built, bypassing the town. Without the business of people traveling through the area, the restaurant and shops suffered. By the 1980s, only a handful of families remained. In 1994, Amtrak discontinued the train stop in Thompson Springs. The latest census shows still about 39 people living in Thompson Springs, but it's mostly abandoned, and all that remains are vacant buildings. Delta Solar Ruins in Hinckley. The engineers with the Delta Solar project proposed a new way to harness the sun's energy using cheaper materials and a much more basic principle. Using satellite-like arrays that would follow the arc of the sun during the day, cheap plastic panels impregnated with magnifying elements would shoot intensified rays of sunlight into a crucible of combustible material, which would create steam to a power generator. This solution to harnessing the sun's energies may have been more complicated than standard solar panels, but the low cost of materials made it a viable option for Delta. However, even the rugged plastics and metals used in the Delta array were no match for the desert winds, which quickly damaged most of the collectors that the engineers were able to install. This project was deemed a fraud in 2018, and the company which produced them was fined $50 million. The remains of the array remain at the site. Many of the plastic panels are hanging from their ends, or are missing completely. Ruin, and Bluff. It's estimated the structures were constructed sometime in the 1200s and would have been home to 3 or 4 ancestral Puebloan families. The ruin comprises between 14 and 18 rooms, lined against a narrow cliff ledge in the alcove. The narrow rooms are accessed through a rooftop doorway and connect to one another through internal doorways. Peephole windows look out onto the green valley below, where the Anasazi inhabitants would have cultivated their crops. Frisco Ghost Town. Founded in 1875 as a silver mining town, Frisco earned a reputation for being one of the wildest towns in the western frontier. At its peak, the town had a population of roughly 6,000 people and over 23 saloons, brothels, and gambling dens. A sheriff by the name of William Pearson was eventually brought in to bring law and order to Frisco by any means necessary. Pearson warned the town's outlaws that he had zero plans to build any jails, and to either leave town or be shown out. It was reported that on the night of the Sheriff Pearson's arrival, he killed 6 people. In 1885, the Horn silver mine collapsed and was rebuilt. However, Frisco never returned to its original prosperity. By the 1920s, the town was officially abandoned. A cemetery, the charcoal kilns used to smelt the silver, and many abandoned structures remain today. Thistle Ghost Town. The town of Thistle was established in 1883. It prospered for a time as a farming and ranching community and became a major stop on the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. Then, in April of 1983, a massive landslide, the costliest in the U.S. history, dammed 2 creeks, flooding and destroying most of this small town. Only a few structures remain, and most can be seen from the road, including a red schoolhouse, a house on a hill, a half-sunken house, and the old train machine shop. Tintic Standard Reduction Mill in Genola. The Tintic Standard Reduction Mill was also known as the Tintic Mill or the Herald Mill. The mill was built around 100 years ago and had an extremely short working lifespan. The Tintic Mill was designed by W.C. Madge in 1920. At that time, mine owners such as Tintic Standard felt that the cost of transporting ore were too high, so they were looking for ways to mill the ore themselves and then transport it. Construction was completed in 1921, after which the plant immediately began processing ore containing precious metals. The metals processed here including copper, gold, silver, and lead. The Tintic Mill was one of the first American plants to use the Augustin process in the 1920s, which involved acid brine chloridizing and leaching. This is a process during which the ore is treated with chemicals that separates the valuable metals into soluble salts, while the impure elements remain insoluble. However, this method was not an ideal way to extract precious metals. Technology was already coming up with new and more efficient methods around the time that the mill was operating. This meant that the mill very quickly became obsolete and was closed down in 1925. After being operational for only 4 years, the mill was left abandoned on the hillside. Intermountain Indian School in Brigham City. When Bushnell Hospital closed, Brigham City was left with essentially an abandoned town on its border. The idea was put forth of making it a boarding school for children from the Navajo Nation, where good schools were not available at the time. Bushnell Hospital became Intermountain Indian School, a more progressive Native American boarding school that attempted to educate Navajo children, while allowing them to keep their culture. It is rumored that many students had negative experiences at the school until it closed in the 1980s. Now the school has been left to the elements and will continue to see decay. Those are the top 10 abandoned places in Utah. Make sure you like and subscribe if you want to see a part 2. Thanks for watching.